like, for those who are technically minded, you can either use Dropbox, Google, or YouTube, and then send it via a secure email. I just ask a question locally as to whether that's easily explained on our website. I'm going to make sure that that is there. But yes, we do take evidence, and our criminal justice department make a decision then as to whether we actually proceed with that or whether we use letters of advice and warning. But absolutely, there are ways to do that.
Thank you very much. The next question is posed by Malcolm Bridges, who sadly is in hospital. I think there's a get well card that's sent around tonight, so if you haven't signed it, perhaps you'd like to. We'll send our best wishes to Malcolm. In the meantime, you did ask a question. I can ask the Chief Constable if he can answer that.
This is about funding for counter-terrorism. There are two bits of the activity that we do around counter-terrorism. There's quite a lot, which is the very specialist resources that are funded separately through national grant. That is managed by the Home Office into sort of the policing infrastructure. We run part of that locally, but that is all funded separately, the specialists. But of course, we don't counter terrorism just with specialist resources. It is also about the work that we do in our neighbourhoods, and also when things do happen, it is general policing who responds to that. So we're trying to capture what the full extent of all the budgetary issues are around dealing with terrorism. Because there is a strong message is if the rest of policing reduces, that it has an impact not just on the day-to-day, but also on our ability to counter terrorism as well. So that is part of the work that we're doing collectively with police and crime commissioners and chief constables across the country to make sure that our bid to Treasury, in the same way that lots of other bids are going to Treasury, identifies the full impact of any austerity within policing.
Thank you very much. It's Councillor Carrybath.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Chief Constable, good evening. And I think you referred to the serious terrorist attacks in London. And I totally and wholeheartedly agree with you that the police, ambulance and the fire services responded magnificently. However, recently I was approached by one of the CID officers in the Met, and he raised serious concerns about how the police officers were asked to attend these incidents without any body armour. Can I seek your assurances that the officers are properly equipped with all the necessary safety equipment, including appropriate body armour, in the likely event, and God forbid it never happens in Wokingham, or if our officers are asked to assist in neighbouring abutters, what can they be protected, please?
Yes, we provide appropriate protective equipment to all our officers and staff. Perhaps the Met officer would like to transfer it to Thames Valley
I think it's Councillor Lee has a question for the Lee talking about it there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is a question which happened directly in my own ward, Norreys. It's not drugs. But we're experiencing a number of inappropriate incursions by the travelling community. A recent one caused extensive damage to a country park, which was being provided for a new housing development. In fact, it brought one young mother, when I was over there, with her children, to tears when she saw the damage caused by the actions of this group. The damage caused has led to considerable financial costs, with no comeback on this inconsiderate community. Would you agree that your powers and ours need to be urgently reviewed and strengthened, and financial penalties imposed on the perpetrators of this criminal damage?
Last year, I know that across the M4 corridor, we had real problems with unauthorised encampments. We've had a number of examples happening this year as well. As a result of that, at the recent Chief Execs meeting with all the Chief Execs across the Thames Valley area with the police and other organisations, we actually had a conversation about what we're going to do around unauthorised encampments, and we've actually set up a task and finish group to make sure that we fully understand the powers that the councils have, that the police have, but also landowners have, and the responsibility, because it's not always clear. So I think the first thing is to make sure that we work collectively at that, and I'm sure your council will want to be involved in that as well. I think that as part of that task and finish group as well, we need to identify actually if there are any gaps as well. Some of the real challenges that we have is people that sort of say, actually they have committed the damage, but there's little evidence around actually who has committed the damage. There's an assumption, but in a lot of cases, or the majority of cases, that can't be proved. I think the other key point around the police powers is they're conditional. There are some conditional powers that have to be in place around certain conditions, and also the impact has to be fully understood. When we have unauthorised encampments within any local police area, we monitor that on a daily basis. We serve a code of conduct, and it forms part of the discussion at the daily management meeting. I'm not saying we can't improve, because I think there are still some opportunities for that, which is the purpose of the task and finish group. But I will make sure that your council are involved in that as well.
Thank you very much. Imogen?
Hi there, my name's Matt. My question is quite similar to David's, and I think you may have answered some of it, but I'll read it anyway. Woking frequently has problems with groups of travelling communities camping in parks, car parks, playing fields and open spaces that are clearly not provisioned for camping. These campsites prevent people with their amenities are intended to use for them. Local residents are naturally distressed when fences are broken down, equipment is damaged, planting is trampled, trees are broken, rubbish and human waste is just left lying around. It seems to take several days to get these campsites moved on, and there seems to be no consequences for the individuals as they invade these spaces. Residents are very quick to call the police and Woking Borough Council when these encampments are moving in, but there appears to be no immediate effort to remove them. The public also don't understand the difference between private land, public land, and do not see a school, a park or a car park as being anything different, and even when they may be in private ownership. What can Woking Borough Council do better to help the police use their powers to prevent and quickly remove these encampments? Thank you.
I probably have answered that with the answer I gave last time. I think there is more we can do around the communication as well with members of the public, because it is really confusing as to the different bits of legislation and the powers that we have, you have, landowners have. Some of them take quite considerable time, but I think where we can be better, and I'm not saying this is true in this case, the cases you've had here, but where I think we can be better is sometimes we go down a course of action because that is the appropriate one at the time we started, but we don't always review if circumstances have changed, and therefore then other powers that might be speedier could be used. And I think that's where we need to probably get better in the future. And again, that will help with the task and finish group, I think.
Thank you very much. I think we now have Mr. Clive Jones in the corner.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chief Constable, for coming along with your team to answer our questions. My question is, as the autumn approaches, the nights draw in, what can you do to ensure that as many cyclists as possible are lit up as they ride around our neighbourhoods? I'm particularly concerned that many teenagers do not have appropriate lights on their bikes and do not wear reflective clothing, because it's just not cool, is it? My fear is that there could be some very bad accidents or even fatalities.
So we do some things in schools around road safety. I'm not sure if the fire service also do similar sorts of schemes in schools here, but I think there is something around that education in schools, but actually that's all of our responsibility, I think, in terms of, so it's a parental responsibility for young people, and we can do so much, but I don't see us running around enforcing our way out of this problem. This is about education for all of us. Clearly, if there are some examples where our teams are out, they will stop and they will advise, but I think we need to take it upon all of us to actually see what we can do in terms of that, and we will continue the work we're doing in schools.
Thank you very much. We've got about 2 minutes left, so if there's any, did you indicate some? Will they can be brief, 3 of you then, that's Prue, Emma, Simon, and then that is it. Simon.
Good evening and welcome to Woking Borough. I chair the Woking Rural Crime Action Group. A few years ago, Thames Valley Police acknowledged that rural crime was really not receiving an appropriate focus, and they increased their resources to address the legitimate concerns of members of the more rural community. Whilst this additional resource is much appreciated, are you able to commit that the Thames Valley Police will maintain this level of focus?
So rural crime is absolutely priority. You'll see this up on the priority list there. My Police and Crime Commissioner holds me to account and asks me on a regular basis about what we're doing with rural crime. We have had some real successes, and I think a lot of that is down to the engagement we have with landowners, farmers, gamekeepers, because the joint patrols work really well, and I think pretty certainly we were talking earlier about some of the work we're doing with the rural neighbourhood action groups. So yes, we are still maintaining the momentum in terms of rural crime.
Thank you very much. Prue, could you be brief?
I will, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Today a report came out, I think from the IPCC, about how to handle incidents where people have mental health issues, and to approach it as if when somebody's behaving strangely, perhaps they're ill rather than being a criminal. I wondered if you could just briefly tell us what you do in Thames Valley to try and take account of people's mental illness.
So we've done a lot of training around mental health for our officers, working with other charities who've come in to provide that support, for example, Mind. We have worked with the Mental Health Trust as well, so we have a mental health practitioner. I think I might have talked about the triage car, where we have a mental health practitioner working with a police officer, and there's one in this area in Berkshire. I don't think they cover every night of the week, but they do 7 days a week now. And the advantage of that is that if we get calls, then we send a mental health practitioner, and they can be that first port of call. They're able to access all the NHS records, and they also advise our teams actually while they're on duty, which certainly has helped. We have reduced the numbers of Section 136 detentions under the Mental Health Act. We're reducing the number of times where we're taking people into custody, and also we're reducing the numbers of times where people suffering from mental health are transported in ambulances, in police cars. They're now transported in ambulances. So there's a lot that we have done. I go back to what I said at the very beginning, is that we're still getting a lot of calls around mental health. So the police service is often not the right port of call, so there's more we need to do. But in terms of our staff, there's been a lot of training, and they feel much more confident about dealing with problems.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. And lastly, Emma.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to ask a question about cybercrime. Why is it that it's almost impossible for the police to track down cybercrime when it comes to money issues that are being stolen from people's bank accounts, etc.?
So if crimes like that are committed, then they reported into action fraud rather than to a police force. And what happens with that, then the action fraud will look at the analysis, see if there are any patterns, and then we'll send out certain numbers of investigations out to police forces to do locally, or if they're a major sort of investigation, then they might well go into the National Crime Agency or other organisations. I think it's probably accepted that the service that is being provided to many victims is not as good as it should be. This is a national concern. There's some work that is being done nationally to try and link the various organisations that deal with cybercrime and fraud. We've also been having some discussions very locally about how we prioritise the most vulnerable victims of fraud and cybercrime. So actually we're doing some changes to the reports that are going into action fraud, so we can identify and then also investigate, but also put a lot of preventative measures around that, around the most vulnerable. So we are doing some more locally, but the scale is quite large, and the offenders could be anywhere in the world. That is some of our challenges.
Thank you, members. That is the end of that session. And may I thank the Chief Constable and his team for coming here this evening, making an excellent presentation and taking lots and lots of questions. So thank you very much. It is much appreciated.
Thank you.
Again, you don't have to stay. They're always welcome.
Thank you. See you in a year's time.
Thank you. Right, okay. I think you probably had a list of the activities of the mayor and the deputy mayor over the summer period. Have you had that list? Already? Oh. Okay, that's good to hear. We've been very, very busy actually. And you will see we've been spending a lot of time in summer fetes over the whole of the summer. Some were lovely, sunny, brilliant days, and some were less so. But I was really impressed by the work of our charities. We turned up at all these events. And we have some excellent ones operating in Woking. And I have really been impressed by some of the work some of these people do. Members will be aware of my wish to support cancer champions and charities in support of cancer, and to help the Royal Berks Hospital to purchase a portable scanner for the cancer ward at a cost of some £8,000. They have £5,000, and I want to match it to make up the difference. In order to raise a cash level at that level, we can ask for your support and others, not just your support, and others, in trying a mayoral event, and I'll put this all in writing, at the Hilton Hotel on Saturday the 17th of February. And as it's Valentine's week, and love will be all around us, we can have a Valentine theme. So bring your wives, girlfriends, or wives and girlfriends, I don't really mind. I think we have some confessions going on in the corner. Some Liberal Democrat confessions. They're all fresh back from the conference. They're well up a bit. But seriously, guys, I hope you'll support that for a very good cause. 17th of February, and lots of details will come out to you. And every penny we raise will go, and I will personally take to the Royal Berks Hospital and give them the money towards the scanner for the wall. I think that's something we could really do and be remembered for. Fine. That's that. And we can now move on to the item 40, the Treasury Management Outturn Report. This is a riveting document, as I understand it. It's on the agenda from pages 45 and 71, and I believe Councillor Wood was going to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It is a riveting document. It's a very detailed document, and I don't intend to go through a lot of it. I just want to explain that the role of our Treasurer is to manage cash flows, to place surplus funds, and to finance capital spend. And the key objective is to minimise the cost of debt and to generate an optimum return on our cash investments within safe risk parameters. What I have done though is I've extracted some key points from the very detailed report. Our external debt increased from 47.8 million to 65.8 million pounds, as we had one new borrowing towards the funding of Bohunt School. This borrowing of £18 million was achieved at a very advantageous rate of 40 basis points below the Public Works Loan Board offered rate. It's quite an achievement. The housing revenue debts were reduced from 85 million to 81.5 million pounds during the year, and the average interest rate on all loans was 3.32%. Capital expenditure was 72 million for the general fund and 4.9 million pounds for the housing revenue account. The other aspect is the return on our investments, which was 1.66% for funds managed internally and 0.5% for externally managed funds. So that's a brief summary, and I therefore ask the Council to first of all note that this report was presented to the Audit Committee on the 13th of June 2017 and to the Executive on the 27th of July 2017, and secondly to approve the Treasury Management Annual Report 2016-17 and the actual 2016-17 prudent indicators within the report.
Thank you very much, Ivan. Do you have a second?
I do.
Councillor Margetts, do you wish to speak now or hold?
I'll hold.
You're on hold, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? There being none, Charles? you wish to say anything? Or?
No, thank you.
Okay. His lines were easy, weren't they? Okay, members, it's been proposed, it's been seconded, no questions. Can I see what a show of report, accept the report? That's unanimous, well done. Very good.
Did you always behave like that?
Okay, statements by the leaders and executive members. We don't have a leader here tonight, we have the deputy leader. So I guess we'll start there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to mention a few things about planning, which seems to be making all the running in the newspapers at the moment. Right, so just to remind everybody that we are a planning authority. We must comply with the law. Oh, sorry. What am I doing? Sitting on it? Oh, thank you very much. Oh, I was getting confused already. But we must comply with the law, which requires us to assess our future housing need and determine where this housing should go, and ensure that we achieve the vital infrastructure. This is called establishing a local plan. We are currently updating our existing local plan to take us up to 2036. The first stage in this review is to determine objectively our housing numbers, which has been calculated at 856 per annum. A new national method from the government, which will be brought in formally in April, potentially shows this need to be 879. Right, we then have to determine where these houses should go, and we request landowners in the borough to submit their proposed sites for consideration. We received 263 search sites. Our role now is to assess all these sites to arrive at a considered and professionally researched opinion as to the best sites to accommodate these numbers. If we do not carry out such a robust assessment, when our plan is publicly examined, we will lose arguments put forward by aggrieved landowners whose sites have not been approved nor properly assessed. The research that we do will carry out all aspects of their transport hubs, doctor surgeries, flood areas, etc., including the impact on the countryside and green belt. We have commissioned master planners to help with this review, and they will be starting with the three largest sites submitted: Graiseley, Barkham Square and Twyford. In terms of having pre-agreed any of these, which we keep hearing we have, please note paragraph 3.23 of the tender document, taking as an example Twyford. If the sites are to be allocated, a major part of the evidence base would be to justify why growth here, i.e. the Greenbelt, and not elsewhere in the borough instead, should take place. No decisions have been taken. We are assessing sites which have been put forward by landowners in this borough. In the case of Graiseley, this is a joint submission with Wokingham Council, Reading Council, West Berkshire Council. The logic behind this large application is an attempt to establish, with government approval, a large site to enable us to protect as much as possible of our much valued countryside. Much has been said in the past about leaked documents and secret plans of this authority. We have no secret plans, nor have we identified where some 20,000 houses should go by 2036. What we are doing is to determine the best possible locations which cause the least damages. 20,000 houses will cause damage. There's no doubt about that. We could adopt the approach of simply ignoring the law and leaving all decision making to opportunistic developers and a distant planning inspector from Bristol, or work together to get the best for all our residents. This should not be a political football. We have to do this, we have to get the best for all our residents. We are borough representatives here. We are not parish councillors. We have to look after 168,000 residents. I fully intend to do my best for all residents. In my own ward, we have already suffered an extra 33% more units than required even under the current plan. And congestion in Wokingham Town